Connecting. Okay, so it looks like we're recording. And so as everyone's coming in, I am Tanya Williamson. I am the Outreach Volunteer Coordinator for the San Juan Community Land Bank. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is our inaugural community conversation, step into the Zoom virtual world for a town hall meeting. That's what we're hoping for tonight, and we're glad you can join us. I wanted to let you know, set up the format. I'm going to share my screen with you. And here we go. Get that started. Oh, it gets hidden in there. There we go. From the beginning. So just to make sure you are all in the right spot, District 2 Community Conversation. Tonight, we'll talk to you about who we are, what the Land Bank does, give you some updates, and then take questions. It'll be about a 20-minute presentation or so, starting with our director, Lincoln Borman, and then our Orcas Preserve steward, Peter Guiazet, will give you some updates. And then we will also like to introduce you, if you haven't seen your commissioners before, we have Sandy Friel, if you wouldn't mind waving, Sandy, and then also Brian Weiss. One thing to note is that before we dive in after the presentation, we've got a Q&A tonight. We have disabled the chat because we have a lot of people and to try to keep things moving as efficiently as possible. What I'm asking from participants is if you could, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A section. Type your question into the Q&A, and then I will read these questions out loud to the commissioners and staff, and they will answer them live tonight during the meeting. If you have a question for a specific person, if you could put their name into the question, that way I'll know who to address it to, that would be wonderful. And we'll just go through that. Hopefully we'll have a little over an hour for questions. Couple things to note, if I see the same topic, let's say, quite a few questions are the same, I'll just consolidate it into one. And I will do my best to answer all the questions as they come up, and also to allow time for everyone to ask a question. So perhaps some people are more apt to ask than others. I'll try to get through all the names. And I believe you do have the option, if you don't want your name to be seen, you can ask anonymously. And I think that's everything. I'm going to cheat and look at my notes real quick. I think that's it. So I think we can move on. I'm going to hand it over to Lincoln Borman so he can start his presentation.
Great, thanks, Tanya. So I am going to share my screen. And we're going to start tonight with an acknowledgement that we reside on and care for the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people who have stewarded and called this place home since time immemorial, and let us honor inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been passed down from generation to generation. So, as we begin this presentation, just an overview, the place I want to start really is with the name. In particular, the word conservation, which is not something we incorporate at this point, but it was part of the original name of the organization, the Citizens Conservation Land Bank, and the original ordinance. And we're looking at bringing it back for a couple of reasons. One, the land bank as a phrase is not terribly descriptive of what we do. Certainly we're not a bank. And also with a lot of people coming here from different places, for most of the country, land banks are entities which work on affordable housing using tax foreclosures. We don't do that. What we do is conservation. So we're looking to integrate that name back into what we call ourselves, just for clarity. So why do we have a land bank? The context is pretty dire, quite honestly. When you're looking around what's happening in the world today, it's pretty obvious that we're facing some severe problems mostly due to climate change. So fires, droughts, floods, storms, and political unrest, all kind of driven by that one our changing planet, really. And we're not immune to that here. We've seen significant ecological or environmental degradation, drying out of our landscape, so stressing our systems, our trees, increased fire risk, concerns over water availability, et cetera. And also, it's pretty clear we're having a big influx now of people coming here. We see that in the real estate market and how frenzied it's gotten, and also in the number of development permits that are happening. So we've got a lot of people here and a lot of activity. The more people we have, the more conflict there's a potential for, but also there's a great increase in demand for natural areas and places to recreate. And the more conserved natural area we have, it slows the demand for increased services. We do quite a bit to really gauge the community and where they are on these questions about what we do about conservation and how important it is and what about it is important. So this is from a survey that was done in conjunction with the terrestrial managers, which we actually coordinated. It's all the conservation managers in the county. This is from 2019, so pre-pandemic, obviously, but one of the questions really was, how do we deal with tourism and the fact that we've got so many people here? What are some of the ways that residents would be interested in trying to address that situation? And so here's some of the answers. And what we get from that is people are really interested in all kinds of trails and paths, bike trails, pedestrian trails, but also interested in acquiring more public land and a variety of public land. So beaches, mountains, really a whole slew of things. In case you're wondering where we are in relation to other counties in Western Washington, basically we're dead last in terms of the amount of public land we have. So some of the mainland counties in particular have a huge amount of public land, but we're behind even Island and Kitsap County. And I just put this up there to show that, you know, we definitely have some room and probably have a good bit of need for additional public lands to meet public demand. So a little bit about the land bank itself. It began in 1990 with state enabling legislation that allowed counties to levy a real estate excise tax on real estate transactions to purchase conservation areas. That legislation required counties, the voters of those counties, to authorize it. So that's happened 3 times here. We're the only county in the state. Each reauthorization for us is a 12-year period. So we're authorized to collect that REIT to 2026. And that is our principal source of revenue. Our mandate, which was established back in 1990, is broad. As you can see, there's a lot in there, but you can break it down into 4 basic things. Ecosystem integrity, which is really about managing for nature, natural processes, species, things like that. Rural character, really trying to maintain the feeling of the place as you drive on a county road or look out across a landscape, just trying to keep that open space intact. Community health, providing places for people to go to recreate on trails and other things. But also there's a lot of evidence that just having nature around promotes health, and pretty strong evidence for that as well. And lastly, agricultural sustainability. And we've done quite a bit in preservation of farmland around the archipelago. So when we're looking at projects and planning, prioritizing, we use a number of tools. In the center, you see the County Open Space and Conservation Plan. That was done in 1990. It's still in place for the county's open space tax programs. But we've done a considerable amount of work since then. We do these parks, trails, and natural areas plans, which involve doing a community survey and also assessment of what we have. Do those every 6 years. We've done a habitat conservation plan, also an ecological assessment, basically with the San Juan Preservation Trust. And the spreadsheet, which you see on the right, is really what we use when we're looking at properties in an attempt to rate them. It's just a way to help us make decisions. So we're looking at things like how big it is, whether there's a potential for finding a funding partner, is it adjacent to protected areas, what's the ecological value, what's the connectivity value. So a variety of criteria here, including agriculture, you see at the bottom. The way this works in terms of open space conservation, on the left-hand side of this, you'll see that we're looking at scale. And so there's large landscapes or specific features. So an example of a large landscape project might be Turtleback, where there are a whole variety of things going on. Really connectivity, ecological resilience. So those ecological variables there, also recreational, and Turtleback is also a specific feature, obviously. But within that vein, we also do very different kinds of projects. So neighborhood open space projects such as Drake's Park in Friday Harbor and East Sound Waterfront Park, also one that provides shoreline access. There are two different types of projects we do for the most part. Conservation easements are where we're purchasing development rights on private property that remains in private ownership, but we reduce the density. So this is a really good tool for working farms and forests, and it helps preserve that rural character and views. Outright ownership are preserves. We use that when public access is important, or when we're looking to steward particular ecological resources. For example, if there's a section of old growth forest on a piece of property, it might be important for us to own that outright to be able to manage it properly. And also we do lease agricultural land in an effort to try and make it more affordable for farmers to continue going out here and continue producing food. So, whoops, that's not right. Our process, we have a volunteer commissioner. You see, you've got two commissioners here tonight. They're appointed by the county council, and they set policies. We have regular meetings. Everyone's welcome to attend those meetings. So they talk about the projects. Eventually, the projects end up in budgets. That gets recommended to the county council, and the council will approve those. And before you get to closing, accept the deeds for everything that we do. The staff evaluates those projects, negotiates transactions. We're always seeking partners and grants, doing budgets, transaction documents, and keeping the community involved and informed, as we're attempting to do here tonight. We try and be as efficient as we can. We are limited in our ordinance to not having administrative costs exceed 10% of revenue. Over the life of the program, we've kept that to just over 6%. We've also done a lot of work with securing additional funding, over $40 million since 2005. And that's not just for our projects, but for our partners' projects, for example, national park projects or state parks projects. That does not include property donations or funding we've received for stewardship activity. We also use volunteers quite a lot. This past year obviously has been extraordinarily difficult, but hopefully as we emerge from this situation, we'll be able to get back into that. Using volunteers is really great. It's just an excellent way for people to get to know the organization and get outside on property, and it really helps us get things done. So what have we accomplished? We have 49 conservation easements on 7 islands, and these are things like working farms and forests, shorelines, wetlands, etc. And we have 38 preserves, with 29 of those preserves being open to the public, or more than 76%. The 2 newest preserves open, one is on San Juan Island, Zylstra Lake, and another is on Lopez Channel Preserve, and both of those opened last fall. In case you're wondering what the impact on your taxes might be, it's really important to keep that in proper perspective. So the total taxable value of real estate in the county is more than $7.5 billion, whereas the total taxable value of land bank preserves is 35 million, so less than 0.5% of that total. We do this exercise regularly, looking at if we added the value of land bank preserves back to the tax rolls, what the theoretical tax savings might be on an average property, and that comes out to about $15 a year. So we think it's worth it. We hope you do as well. Here are our preserves and conservation easements on Orcas, and Peter Guiazet is going to talk a lot more about these as we continue in the presentations. I'll just say that we've got 13 preserves and 8 of them are open to the public. So we'll come back to that after I wrap up my presentation and we go into Peter. So some projects that we've done. One you may have heard of, this is an addition to Turtleback Mountain. It's a 36-acre property on the southern border of Turtleback. And it's got a variety of things going for it, really some great habitat. It does have a considerable amount of shoreline. It also obviously, it's got that shared boundary, and there's a good potential for public access, so to expand the Turtleback Trail system to incorporate this area. That inset you see is after we've dealt with some of the Scotch broom you can see in that the bigger, larger photo. This is all made possible because we received a $2 million donation for the purchase. And this is just a couple more shots of downslope area of the property going down to the shoreline of Massacre Bay. There is a small cove on it, and we're looking at the potential for public access. We don't know whether it's really possible at this point, but we'll keep examining that, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that in the future. So when we're looking at priorities on Orcas in particular, as I mentioned, we have a variety of studies we use and parameters we're looking at, and it's pretty broad. But just for example, some of the things we're focusing on when we're trying to figure out, what's important, what really should be a priority for us. This is something that the Nature Conservancy did. It looks at resilience of the landscape in the face of climate change. So the darker blue you can see are the more resilient areas that core in Moran, for example, and also coming out of Turtleback and that central lobe of Orcas. So that's one thing we take into consideration. We're also looking at other things like water access. And in this case, Orcas has a lot of water access points, but it's pretty difficult really to get to the shoreline on Orcas relative to the other islands. So there are these variety of access points, but they tend to be pretty small and pretty limited. So it's something that we do think about quite a bit when opportunities arise. And realistically, this is kind of why that sense prevails that even though there are a number of access points to get to the water on Orcas, on the other islands, those access points lead to long beaches, stretches of tideland or outright ownership. But for Orcas, that's not generally the case, and it's just a feature of the geography of the island. But it's something that we continue to look at. And so when we think about Orcas priority areas, what you're seeing here, first of all, are properties that are in consideration now. This one next to Obstruction Pass State Park. The state park is looking at acquiring. This is the Youngburn property adjacent to Moran, and also here's another property just east of East Sound along Mount Baker Road, with the idea of keeping that area open as you travel along the road, so preserving that open space. But other areas you can see, for example, the area west of Turtleback, there's a lot of contiguous forested area there. Crow Valley is another one that we focus on. And there are others around the islands as well, with some potential shoreline access in places. But this is part of why we want to have this meeting tonight, that we want to ask what you think. We want to know what's important to you and what your priorities are. So we'll come back to that in the Q&A when we get there. But right now I'm going to stop sharing here. And we're going to go to Peter. I'll take it from here.
I'm going to start sharing. And why? Okay. So thank you, Lincoln. As Lincoln said, I'm Peter Gioze. Although it feels like a lot longer, I joined the Land Bank just 2.5 years ago. Work has been fun and demanding, never dull, and I feel very fortunate to be on Orcas representing District 2. My slide's not advancing. Oh, there we go. I'd like to first introduce the Land Bank staff members that you're going to most likely encounter on Orcas. On the left is Kayla Seaforth. Kayla's a talented and tireless partner in just about everything that happens on Orcas, and is the only other full-time Land Bank employee on the island. Next is Erin Halcomb. She's based on San Juan Island, but manages conservation easements and coordinates our stewardship efforts across the islands. Finally, we have Charlie Benke, manages agricultural easements and farm leases and supports stewardship activities on San Juan Island. Kayla and I are based in the small office on Caufelt Farm Preserve, and we encourage you to get in touch or drop by if you'd like to share your opinions, learn more about what we're up to, or discuss how you might get involved. Other staff listed below, except for Amanda on Lopez, are based on San Juan and generally support efforts countywide. Here's Lincoln's Orcas map again with the open preserves identified by name. I'm going to describe our work across all of the properties, and we'll highlight some of the recent activities and priorities on Turtleback, Caufelt Farm, and Coho Preserve. I know Lincoln referred to the strong interest in shoreline access. I'd like to point out that you can get to the beach at Deer Harbor Preserve, East Sound Waterfront Park, and Crescent Beach on all Land Bank preserves. In addition to the preserves, which are managed by staff, staff also manage and monitor 34 conservation easements on private lands on Orcas, Waldron, Blakely, and Crane Islands. Lincoln shared the Land Bank's mandate and noted that it's quite broad. Although we probably touch every aspect of the mandate on Orcas, much of our energy goes into stewarding our natural areas. May sound a little corny, but working to protect and improve the varied island habitats is a passion for us, and you've probably noticed a variety of projects underway. If you've been on any of the preserves lately, you've probably seen activities ranging from forest thinning to weed management and planting. From left to right on the photos here, we have some wildflower plug planting and oak tree planting on Turtleback, and some riparian planting at Coho Preserve. Increasingly, we view our management actions through the lens of changing climate. And as a first step, we developed a table outlining some of the likely climate change impacts across the Orcas preserves, as well as some steps we might take to increase their ecological resiliency. Our broad goals and objectives for the preserves are outlined in management plans that we update roughly every 10 years or so in response to new information or changing conditions or to the availability of additional resources. Not surprisingly, probably, large-scale land stewardship is costly, and for this reason, we keep a sharp eye out for grant opportunities, and look for partnerships whenever possible. As the land bank increased its habitat restoration work, it became pretty clear that locally sourced native plants were in short supply. So to address this need and to support the work of partner organizations, Eliza Habegger created the Salish Seeds Nursery Project on San Juan. Today it's run in collaboration with the San Juan Preservation Trust at Red Mill Farm Preserve, which is owned by the Preservation Trust. The nursery also provides plants for the land bank's periodic and seemingly quite popular native plant sales. Providing low impact recreational access to healthy scenic landscapes is another important focus. But with this in mind, I'll just point out that it's tough to build and maintain miles of trails with only 2 staff members on the island. As a result, we end up relying heavily on the Washington Conservation Corps, the recently formed Island Conservation Corps, or CCC, and the Youth Conservation Corps, as well as many volunteers. Thanks to winter storms, we also spend a fair amount of time removing fallen trees from trails and dealing with hazard trees around parking lots. And our many entry roads and parking lots also require regular maintenance to deal with washouts and potholes and accumulating organic debris. As you know, you've probably all noticed, with increasing use, a lot of the parking lots have been full and occasionally need to be expanded. To keep people oriented and to protect the conservation values on the preserves, we maintain quite a bit of signage. Land bank signage is fairly low profile by design, and we try hard to strike a balance between conveying enough information about directions and rules, while also not sort of littering the landscape with signage. Although COVID has really hampered our ability to host volunteer events, providing opportunities for involvement in the preserve stewardship is really central to our work. We've managed to host a small number of work parties over the past year, and are really hoping we'll be able to do quite a few more soon. These photos are from recent efforts on turtleback, including some oak seedling planting and acorn collection, as well as acorn planting. Thanks to Tanya, the Land Bank's Outreach and Stewardship Coordinator, we've been able to keep people informed of the events and projects and other happenings via social media, press releases, and the Land Bank's website. And as a large landowner in the county, we have a lot of neighbors, although I'm still meeting many of them and have many more to go. Building and maintaining good relations along our common boundaries is a high priority, and we spend a fair amount of time doing so. Lastly, through our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or JEDI committee, Land Bank staff are examining past and present policies and practices in the conservation movement and society in general that have negatively impacted people of color and other overburdened communities. Along these lines, the Land Bank is committed to making our preserves accessible and welcoming to everyone. In addition to the ecological and outreach work, we spend a fair amount of time mowing, weed whacking, trash collecting, fixing fences, improving drainage, fixing leaks, and doing a whole lot of other mundane tasks. The upper left and middle photos show the Washington Conservation Corps cleaning the overgrown dam spillway at Fowler's Pond Preserve and a newly installed field gate along Orcas Road. The photo on the right shows former Land Bank staffer Eric Nelson in a quagmire while mowing Deer Harbor Preserve. So turtleback is basically why I came to the land bank, and I imagine many of you love it as well. It was purchased jointly by the Land Bank and the Preservation Trust, and the Land Bank has since managed it and managed the roughly 1,600 acres, while the Preservation Trust has held a conservation easement and maintained a stewardship endowment. In addition to making the early improvements such as parking lots and trails, the Land Bank has made real progress on the Gary oak habitat restoration, particularly on the southern slope. Some of that work is shown in these photos. From an ecological standpoint, Turtleback really has great bones. In my view, it's our responsibility and fortunately our pleasure to try to maintain native biodiversity, or maybe even make some modest gains in it in the face of introduced weeds, runaway herbivory by the deer population, and the effects of climate change. To guide our work over the next decade or more, we recently launched a forest health assessment in partnership with the Preservation Trust that covers Turtleback and their Turtle Head Preserve. The resulting report from Rain Shadow Consulting should help inform a major update to the preserve management plan in 2021. And as part of that process, we'll be assessing the potential for a trail connection to the preserve addition that Lincoln mentioned. That's shown that in the lower right there. Beginning later this year, Turtleback will be part of a landscape scale restoration grant that covers 4 sites across the islands. That's led by the Washington Department of Natural Resources and includes partners such as the Samish Indian Nation, the San Juan Islands Conservation District, the Island Conservation Corps, and Rain Shadow Consulting. Caufelt Farm Preserve is really unique among land bank preserves and poses unique challenges almost daily. In addition to the pastures and gardens and orchards and forests, there's a large wetland and a perennial stream. The property also includes a lot of aging farming and housing infrastructure. The recently adopted preserve management plan outlines broad management objectives for the preserved natural areas, as well as general stewardship goals for the farmed areas and planned improvements to the farm infrastructure. Photo at the left shows our ongoing work to reestablish a native tree and shrub buffer along the creek. The center photo shows ongoing improvements to the so-called heavy use area. This project was designed and funded in collaboration with the San Juan Islands Conservation District. It'll provide livestock shelter, enable manure collection, and help protect water quality. As the management plan gets underway, we're going to complete a trail feasibility assessment to determine whether the conceptual trail design shown in the photo on the right can actually be built. There's strong local interest in the long-term management of the farmed portion of the property, and I'll provide more details on that in this next slide. This timeline shows the major steps in a process that began in early 2019 and that will likely continue into early next year. Our hope is that by carefully considering public input, complexities of farming, natural resource protections, and other factors, we're going to be able to develop a long-term lease model that enables sustainable operations, protects the conservation values, and ensures public benefits from the preserve. As you know, Caufelt is just one of many agricultural properties the land bank has preserved in its ongoing effort to prevent or reduce farmland losses and fragmentation due to development. Thus far, those efforts have resulted in permanent protection of over 1,800 acres of farmland through purchase or conservation easements. Charlie Benke, I mentioned earlier, serves as the land bank's ag program coordinator. He manages farm leases for many of these properties and monitors the conservation easements each year. Land Bank works closely with the Conservation District on ag issues and aims to be a leader in promoting sustainable farming practices in the county. So shifting back to preserve highlights, here we have Coho Preserve near Olga. Coho protects the lower end of Cascade Creek, which flows from Mount Constitution to Buck Bay. And in addition to supporting coastal cutthroat trout, that may also support or it supports also what may be the last wild salmon population in San Juan County. Coho is a nice loop trail that winds through a mature mixed forest, mostly conifers. And one bit of recent news is that our fish monitoring a couple of weeks ago revealed juvenile Chinook salmon in addition to coho that we've been monitoring for years. Unfortunately, the fish in Cascade Creek are threatened by significant withdrawals of water. To work on that, we applied for and received several $100,000 of grants intended to purchase water rights from willing sellers. We also recently got county funds to purchase continuous flow monitoring equipment, which will help us track and respond to dangerously low flow levels without delays. So with luck and hopefully continued goodwill, I hope we'll be able to secure more flow for fish in the next year. Other recent work on the preserve includes the installation of deer fencing and planting of around 7,000 native trees and shrubs. These plants are going to help close artificial gaps in the forest and ultimately increase the conifer canopy along the stream, which will be good for salmon in the long term. We're excited to involve volunteers, students, whoever is interested in the projects at Coho. And for my last slide, I'll just say a few words about Judd Cove Preserve. Formerly a log dump, this 11.5 acre property protects a restored lime kiln, which kind of touches on the Land Bank's historic preservation mandate, and protects important shoreline, tideland, and upland forest habitats. We recently submitted a grant application to restore a portion of the shoreline that was hardened as part of the log operation. Looks like that project will be funded. And as funds allow, we're going to try also to restore the lower end of the highly degraded stream and wetland complex that flows into Judd Cove. And in order to buffer the stream and the preserve in general from nearby development, we recently planted around 900 trees and shrubs, and we'll continue maintaining them until they're established. So that's it for me. I'm grateful for the chance to connect with you all, even on Zoom, and hope we can do it in person sometime soon. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. All right, I'm just sort of going over the questions that have popped up during the presentations. And it looks like we have some comments and then maybe a couple that are sort of similar, but slightly not. So I'll just start reading through them, and I'll let the commissioners choose if they want to, who'd like to answer in the staff as we go. So the first one is it's an anonymous question, no name. Does the land bank make acquisitions of strategic parcels that include residential homes or buildings on them? Assuming so, as a recent 1% contributor through my own land bank acquisition on Orcas, I'd really love the land bank to focus on a strategic acquisition that would help open up more beach access. I imagine from time to time, larger oceanfront homes come on the market that the land bank could purchase, put easements through, and then put the owned tidelands into the public good for access. Perhaps sell the home if it's not in the goal of the land bank to maintain the buildings. That is the complete question. Who would like to take that?
I'll take it. Yeah, that's definitely something we look at. It's really difficult, and obviously a lot depends on the structure we're talking about. We definitely don't want to own waterfront homes, that's for sure. But particularly on Orcas, where there are just very few undeveloped parcels where there's a possibility of public access, it's something that we're probably going to be looking at more and more. So love to talk to you more about that. And I don't know, one of our commissioners may want to weigh in on that as well.
No. All right, we'll go to the next question. Or did I see? Okay. Let's see. I've noticed that the San Juan Preservation Trust has some huge protected land, for example, Entrance Mountain at 400 acres and Diamond Hill. They don't seem primarily motivated to open it up for public access. Could the land bank work with them to either acquire some of this land for the public good or convince them to open more of their land up for public access?
Oh, Peter, I'm going to toss that to you.
Oh, seriously? One minor correction is that the Diamond Hill Preserve is owned by the land bank.
As is Entrance Mountain.
Yeah, the Preservation Trust has portions of property over there as well. So, yeah, I guess we've had a few inquiries, honestly, about both properties. Not that many, though. I recently participated in the Caboo Hill Road Maintenance Association meeting, and the topic didn't come up, but we have fielded a few questions about access, particularly to Entrance Mountain. It is a fairly steep property. In many ways, doesn't lend itself that well to public access. Also, the road that leads to it is private. But I think we would certainly be willing to discuss this with people that are interested in a future meeting. But at this time, we have no plans to create access, and there are quite a few obstacles to that.
It seems like a great discussion topic for a future commission meeting, really. Love to delve into it further.
I'm writing these down. Thank you. So a question from Dylan. I'm reading from his perspective. I'm a 10.5 acre landowner on Orcas and would happily provide an easement across my land if it was in support of greater Cross Island trails for hikers and bikers. In my opinion, this should be one of the main goals of the land bank, providing a single connected trail system across all of Orcas. Is there a process by which I can register my willingness to do this? It would only make sense for me if my neighbors and their neighbors all contributed as well, but I thought I would figure at least starting by collecting willing contributors would help. Thank you.
Well, you just did. We're definitely interested in talking to you about that. We do trail easements on private property. We don't purchase those. We accept them as donations. So this sounds like something we'd definitely like to pursue. That connectivity piece is certainly something that's really of high importance for us.
Thank you. Scooch by. Let's see.
Tanya, I just want to jump in and thank Dylan for his generosity of spirit. And I wish everybody had that attitude. It's not necessarily the American way. And, trails are tough because if you're looking for easements over a long trail that traverses a lot of properties, you've got to get a lot of cooperation, a lot of easements, and it only takes one person, one property to stop that. So it's really tough to do. But again, I agree with you. It's a really important thing. I think there are a lot of folks interested in trails, and I applaud that. And to the extent that we get more people to chip into that effort, we're going to try. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Let's see. Next, this one is phrased as more of a plea and a comment than a question. So it is East Sound, UGA. The entire core from shoreline to shoreline is a critical area riparian wetland watershed. We have near shore saltwater habitat on both sides of a narrow landmass that is a wind tunnel at sea level or close to it. We are experiencing sprawl too, and watching our forests get cut down and our eelgrass beds destroyed. Our waters polluted by stormwater runoff and other issues with massive development. I get it about wanting open space, but when a UGA has the unfortunate situation of being built on a critical area, will the land bank reconsider its stance of letting us be the sacrificial lamb and buy some more shoreline and wetland properties here to preserve? We thank you for saving Crescent Beach Preserve, but so much more is at stake. We really need you. East Sound UGA is unique, in all of the San Juans and needs our care and protection. Thank you for your consideration. And then I'm not sure if anyone wants to take that or if I would keep that for.
It's, we do look at those questions. It's tough for us and UGAs because that's where the density has been allocated in the county. So when we're doing open space conservation, we do tend to try and stay out of the UGA areas for the most part, but not all the time. So we do look at projects there on a case-by-case basis. I'll also say the county has a clean water program now, which is funded by stormwater fees, and they are looking at these kinds of projects as well. So that may be another potential player here to protect some of these areas within UGA boundaries.
Yeah.
Let me jump in on that one too. The questioner knows that I also volunteer on the EPRC, the East Sound Planning Review Committee. And one of the considerations for the land bank, I think it's a very real one, is that land within the UGA is really expensive. You heard Lincoln say earlier that we buy land that's primarily forest preserve land or other rural land where we can get hopefully a good deal on it. So it's tough for the land bank to be able to preserve land within the UGA and densely zoned and highly priced land. So I think what we need to look to for that is primarily regulatory measures, and that's really up to the county.
Thanks. Let's see, the next is Councilman Stevens. Regarding the amount of public land, what is the amount of conserved land in the county? For example, he says most of Blakely is conserved but not public.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councilman. It's pretty tough to calculate actually protected area that's encumbered with conservation easement because every easement is different. So when you look at properties and maybe you're on the county's Polaris system and you see that a parcel has a conservation easement on it, that's going to do very specific things that only pertain in a lot of cases to a portion of that property. So we don't have really good acreage amounts. It's pretty tough to do. It's all dependent on what's in each of those easements. And of course, private property and conservation easement typically is not open to the public. So that's something you need to consider. Yeah, most of Blakely is protected, that's for sure, which is another interesting question because most of it's under conservation easement held by the trust. There's a lot of forest management that happens out there, but also, that acreage that is protected there is very heavily concentrated, on one of the least inhabited islands. So it's a kind of a complicated question.
The next is, looks like a comment from Janet. She's very pleased with the native wildflower plants raised by the land bank, and they are planted in a newly fenced wild area where deer won't eat the flower beds. So thank you, Janet, for supporting our Salish Seeds project. Next we have from Kathy. The goal of connectivity reminds me of the game of Risk. Could connectivity be thought of as influencing or inspiring neighboring property owners of land bank properties to do the right thing through education and demonstration?
We definitely hope for that. You know, we do try and set up our preserves, and we hope our conservation or easement properties do serve as that kind of model. So yeah, we're always interested in neighbors wanting to do things that are consistent with what we're trying to do. Happy to talk, and we do talk to our neighbors a fair amount. So yeah, and we're more than happy to have properties managed well that we're not actually paying for and having to manage ourselves. So love to see that.
I'll just add that we're also very happy to weigh in with advice or opinions and to help if there are efficiencies to be gained across boundaries and things like that. Consider be available anytime to talk.
Great. Let's see, next question. Oh, it's about mountain biking. What is a land bank's perspective on mountain biking on Orcas trails? Is this something you think you might take a stronger position of advocacy toward? I personally feel strong that with some greater trail access, Orcas could become much more of a destination for mountain biking, and with this, bring with it more tourism dollars to help local businesses.
I could take a crack at this. Thanks for your question. Mountain biking is kind of a tough one for us on Orcas. You know, one issue is our habitat protection goals and trying to manage for low impact recreation. I mean, I'll be the first to acknowledge that many land bank or many mountain bikers are very good stewards, will build trails, will maintain trails, you know, and are generally very well behaved group in my experience. It's still a relatively high impact, particularly compared to pedestrian trails. And we don't have a lot of places where the two, I think, can peacefully coexist. You know, we have the North Turtleback mountain bike option, which is not a very exciting trail from a mountain biker perspective, but it's safe for both pedestrians and bikers, and you know, is one of our few opportunities. Another issue I would just stress is staff capacity to build and manage such things. You know, we really are just two people full time on Orcas, and it's all we can do to keep up with what we have already. But you know, happy to continue the conversation, and thank you.
I would just add that we do have mountain biking on preserves on other islands. Mount Grant, for example, on San Juan does have some mountain bike trails, and Lopez Hill and Lopez as well. So it's not something we're dead set against, but protection of the resource really is the key thing that we're trying to accomplish, and we're trying to fit low intensity recreation within that.
Let's see, from an anonymous person, excuse me. I'm concerned about the ever-human increase on public access lands, particularly turtleback. I'm in favor of preserving large areas for habitat that don't necessarily allow public access. Also concerned about increasing forest fragmentation, tree die-off, and decreased bird habitat. I guess that's perhaps more of a comment than a question, unless anybody wants to address that.
I'll just say thank you, and that, you know, I agree. These are concerns. We take, you know, we put a lot of effort into managing the habitats on turtleback and other preserves to keep the impacts as low as possible, to enhance the habitat for birds and other species. And yeah, it's a high priority for us.
Let's see. This one sort of falls in with before and extends on. So if the land bank is not interested in acquiring parcels with residential homes, do you plan to continue to acquire agricultural land that operate as a working farm, such as Kaufeld Preserve?
Well, this is a commissioner question.
I was in the midst of typing an answer to another question. Oops. So where are we? Brian, take it away.
Oh, Brian, you have to unmute.
Thank you. The question, Sandy, was does the land bank plan to continue acquiring working farmland, perhaps with homes and other farm infrastructure on it? And
So,
yes, go ahead.
so I think we have a few properties, maybe or at least one on San Juan Island that we are looking at. Am I right about that, Lincoln? There's one that
Yep.
has development on it. We don't have anything right now that's in our sights on Orcas.
But the agricultural land conservation definitely remains one of our key priorities. It's just a question of what that individual property is like, what the infrastructure is on it. We've certainly learned the hard way about how much it costs to maintain a farm. And even when we have properties where we're just trying to lease pretty much raw land, you really need to put money into infrastructure like providing perimeter fencing and water and power and those kinds of things, which are expensive, but certainly something we continue to look at.
All right, let's see. I have one from Deborah. As a board member of the OIPRD, the Parks and Rec for Orcas, we are looking closely at Mount Baker Farm because we are busting at the seams at Buck Park for our programs. We understand that it is a large undertaking for us and are looking to partner with either a public or private entity. We understand that you would like to keep the view corridor by the road clear, but that is the area where we have the correct outdoor recreation zoning for our purposes. Would the land bank consider a partnership or any type of problem solving to help serve this purpose? The 80 acres seems a lot for Parks and Rec to bite off. We envision a community center, affordable housing, possible farming, maybe native plants. We see this as an opportunity that would massively benefit the Orcas Island community.
Thanks, Deb, for your question and comment. And we have talked about this, and I think all of us would be excited in participating in some way and seeing how this could benefit the wider community. So we are interested in participating. Am I right, Lincoln and Brian?
Definitely. Yeah, I'll add, Deb, and Lincoln mentioned this early on in his presentation. I don't know whether you noticed, but he circled Mount Baker Farm as one of our potential projects of interest. And we tried a couple of years ago to secure a conservation easement on Mount Baker Farm in order to preserve that Mount Baker Road frontage, which is definitely one of the iconic Orcas Island landscapes. We don't want to see that as it could be into, I think, 5-acre lots along that frontage. So at this point, as you mentioned, I think one of the things we need to do is find a way, if we can, to resolve that. You want to basically develop that as sports fields. We'd like to preserve it as an agricultural and view landscape. Maybe with good design, we can do both. I think we're still interested in a conservation easement on the property. And by the way, for folks that know that property, it offers so much in terms of not only beautiful farmland, but infrastructure in the buildings. And to see it in public use, I think would be a real dream, but we're just at the beginning of looking at that. So keep on.
Thank you. Megan asks, how will you take into account traditionally important landscapes and access for tribes of the region within current and future preserves? How do your stewardship and access approaches address tribal access to important habitats of foods and medicines or cultural resources, et cetera, that are located within preserves?
Yeah, that's definitely something we're looking at more and more. Really trying to think about the idea of restoration with traditional native food sources in mind, and Peter can comment on that better than I can. I'll just say that we do have some properties, for example, property out on Henry Island, where we have a provision allowing the Lummi and other tribes to have access for tribal purposes, and to actually stay overnight there for a limited period of time. And we're looking at this on San Juan at Zylstra Lake and Beaverton Marsh, and it's something that we've thought about too with Turtleback, and I'll let Peter fill you in on that.
I really don't have a lot to add except to say that we're very interested in this topic, and we are working slowly, gradually, learning as we go how best to approach it all with an open mind, and just really, we're so early in this process that it's hard to even comment on it, but it's definitely a topic that many land bank staff and the whole organization is interested in, and we are working towards it.
You know, one of the new things is that with the Youth Conservation Corps, there's now a Coast Salish Youth Conservation Corps as well, which is just a fantastic development. So we've been really pleased to help with that program in general and with that aspect of it specifically, just getting some of those folks back out on the land and really looking at land management questions.
I'd just like to mention and remind you of another project that Lincoln mentioned early on, which is the Youngren property that's currently for sale on Orcas, and I think another iconic property. We would love to partner with the Lummies in and others too, perhaps, in that acquisition and in helping to manage the property and hopefully provide public access. The fish hatchery, the salmon hatchery, is a great educational resource. So we're very open to that partnership. But again, that's a project that's just beginning. So we're hopeful.
Let's see. Toby asks, is there an opportunity for Land Bank to work on preservation of the East Sound swale?
That's kind of related to the earlier question on East Sound. And again, you know, properties do come up there. I think that may be something that's more appropriate for the clean water program that the county has, since that's kind of their principal focus. But we're certainly happy to talk about, you know, opportunities there.
Karen asks, is Deer Harbor Estuary a land bank area? Older trees are starting to grow along the eastern edge within the water. Can these be removed?
Yeah, I think you're talking about a conservation easement property. And there is a provision in that easement for maintenance of those fields. So that's kind of an ongoing issue that we have. We'll continue to work on that. Happy to talk more offline with you about that issue.
Let's see. David asks, I believe the land bank is allowed to sell properties they have acquired. Are there any plans to sell or trade any properties at this time?
You know, when we acquire properties, it's really important at the front end for the commission to be clear about what its intentions are. And so in some cases, if the commission feels a property that we don't need to own a property, but the conservation values can be maintained through a conservation easement, and yet the existing owner doesn't want to sell a conservation easement, we can acquire and then resell. And that's something that we did actually with Stonebridge Farm, reselling that 40 acres of that property. Right now, we do have one property that we're looking at on Orcas, which was set up this way, and that's on Entrance Mountain. There's a separate 10-acre lot. And typically what we do is put a conservation easement on it and then resell it. So just trying to protect those values. But that's the key one we've got going on Orcas at present.
All right, let's see. In reading the other questions, another question comes to mind, especially in a denser area with a lot of habitat still to be saved. Would the land bank consider using one of these buildings, say a large waterfront home, as a retreat or educational center aimed at stewardship of lands and critical areas, and why or how to take care of them, for instance? Even tourism could be geared to this because people could then take this knowledge back to where they live, or there could be work parties as part of the privilege of staying there. It's rare that a place like that comes along, but a place such as North Beach Inn and the surrounding cabins would be a perfect example of such a use.
Yeah, you know, we're happy to look at properties. We definitely don't want to acquire a lot of infrastructure and the maintenance obligations that go with that. That's kind of, it's really outside of our purview to run those kinds of retreat programs or things like that. If we could find a partner to take on that aspect of it, that would really be great. But you know, we're certainly not going to say no outright to a property just because it's got some infrastructure on it, if those conservation values are there.
I would just add that take advantage of the opportunity to say that, you know, the island-based Conservation Corps crew really needs housing to be, you know, effective long term. And this is a conversation that comes up periodically through the terrestrial managers group and in other settings, that, you know, each of the ferry served islands really needs some kind of you know, base for crews to stay and work, and visiting researchers to come. And I mean, I think a house like that could present an opportunity, something like that. But you know, there's a lot of complexities there.
Sandy asks, why is there no financial compensation available for trail easements?
It's just not something that we've gotten into. We've had some luck with people donating trail easements, and we're hoping to really continue with that as long as we can. There may come a time where there's a particularly crucial section of trail, and the commission decides it would make sense to that we just need to have that property, even if we have to pay something for it. But at this point, you know, we are having some luck with the donated trail easements, and that's what we'll continue to go with as long as we can. You know, once we cross that bridge, it's kind of hard to go back.
David asks, what is the annual net profit or loss on Kaufeld Farm?
Great question. And that really depends a lot on who's actually running the farm now. So we're through the Conservation, Agricultural, and Resource team that's been looking at Kaufeld and thinking about long-term lease options, they've been looking at some of those questions. And since we've had a short-term lease with the Lums on the property, we've got answers for what they're doing. You know, a lot will depend on who's actually leasing that property and what kind of operation they're doing. But for sure, we've got significant costs associated with maintaining infrastructure out there and doing a variety of things, including improving the soil quality and just dealing with some of those systems out there. You know, we're certainly not going to make a profit on it, but the commission's definitely been quite committed to putting money into maintaining that property.
All right. Toby asks, given the increasing recognition of open space, wildlands, and wildlife ecosystems from Governors Inslee, Newsom, Hillary Franz, and others, do you think a modification of the conservation easement could be created to incorporate the idea of a climate easement?
Yeah, again, you know, with those conservation easements, they're all individual and unique, but certainly we're trying to accomplish some basic objectives. And for example, if there's a forest on it, we're going to push for the forest to be managed to keep accruing carbon on it. So really for old growth characteristics, ultimately, that's our general inclination. However, with conservation easements, you know, it just depends on the owner. You have to negotiate the easement itself, and you have to figure out whether your goals align with theirs. And sometimes it's going to be a strict open space type goal with density reduction. In other cases, you can do some of these more intensive management things. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that.
Okay. We have a question from Kathy. I am curious about the stewardship budget. I have listened to several land bank meetings and I'm confused how the stewardship budget is increased or by what percent with each acquisition.
So the stewardship budget has definitely increased pretty dramatically over the last 10 years. It doesn't necessarily increase by each acquisition because some of them, for example, if we're acquiring a property that's adjacent to an existing preserve, the management obligations that we're taking on may be relatively minimal. But other properties, we've got significant management obligations. So we're currently spending something like 1.5 or 1.6 million annually on stewardship. It's quite a significant percentage of our overall budget.
We're putting about 500,000 a year away towards stewardship. Is that correct? So
right.
not,
yeah. In addition to what we
allocated to
spend.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say to Kathy, not earmarked for a particular preserve, but it's a lump sum allocation that moves over to that side of the sheet.
Yeah, we do have a stewardship fund, which we keep accruing and don't spend money out of. And one of the goals there is just trying to, it's kind of an insurance policy, you know, at some point, the community may not support the 1% real estate excise tax. So we're setting money aside to make sure we have the ability to manage properties in case that happens.
So the next question, if the land bank isn't interested in acquiring parcels with residential homes, Do they plan to continue to acquire agricultural land that operate as a working farm, such as Caulfield Farm Preserve?
I think we already had that one.
Did I ask? Oh, sorry, I didn't hit done. A lot to manage. Thanks for remembering. Trying to give other people, I have some similar questions. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, Toby asks, the Washington DFW is working to restore and preserve eelgrass and kelp, as are NGOs like Friends, because kelp and eelgrass are as good at carbon sequestration as forests. Do you see a pathway where the land bank can work on offshore habitat preservation?
It's kind of difficult for us. We're set up as a land conservation entity. Certainly, one of the things we've been focused on is conserving undeveloped shoreline, which is critical in maintaining that near shore habitat. So we've done a lot of that. It's interesting. In talking about this on a project on Lopez, the question came up about eelgrass because we've seen, particularly with the pandemic and the dramatic increase in boating and anchoring, the potential for significant damage to those eelgrass beds. And I know some organizations are talking about putting up kind of buoys to help people avoid anchor in those eelgrass areas. And we do have some eelgrass areas that are adjacent to our properties. And we'd certainly be interested in taking a look at something like that. It's tough for us to stray too far outside of what our mandate is.
I'll just add that our holdings, our tideland holdings on Orcas are pretty limited, but the grant I mentioned for Judd Cove, the shoreline enhancement work, that's, that was in collaboration with the Friends of San Juan's, and we are working to enhance, through that project, ultimately the eelgrass beds there. We also have the tidelands by the ferry terminal, and I've approached the Friends about some kind of collaboration there. So certainly willing where we have access.
Let's see. Dylan had a follow-up comment, I guess. It would be great if all landowners could register their willingness to share an easement so we could then see the bigger picture connectivity we could achieve from the start through these willing contributions. That could then help guide where strategic acquisitions may be needed to drive further connectivity. Dylan thinks this would be a great way to start. So rather than granting an easement right away, if we could, instead, what if we just built this shared map to start? And then once we see the right level of connectivity in sections, we can proceed to formalize these easements.
That's kind of the course that the Lopez Trails Network folks have taken, where they've gotten handshake agreements from people. They do an annual trip, basically from north to south across north to south across the island. And at some point, the hope is that we'll turn those into official trail easements. But they've been doing that just to try and get people familiar with it, comfortable with it. It's been a good approach for them. It has not yet turned into that legal trail easement that you'd ultimately want, but they're going in a good direction. So something like that on Orcas would be great.
Dylan, I'll just add that thank you for the great comment and great idea. Both San Juan Island and Lopez have trails committees, which have been very effective, I think, and very active. Orcas had a trails committee, I want to say between 5 and 10 years ago, and it kind of fell apart. And I have been taking names of people because I watched the comments in Orcas issues and Rant and Rave and so on, and there's a lot of local interest in trails. So whenever I see somebody who seems to be very proactive. I write down their name. And I think that what you're suggesting is a great way to start. And you're on my list now.
I think that's a good thing. So let's see. The next is a question about Caulfield Farm from the last commission meeting regarding who is doing the viability for the farm and how many animals can it sustain? How does that work out for the economic viability of a leaseholder? What's going on with the log dump?
I think I'll try to answer some of that. Although Aaron Halcomb, who's not here today, did the actual answering of the questions, I was copied on them. I believe all the questions that were answerable at the time were answered, and there was follow-up to see if that was the case. I think a number of those questions really fall into the Cart-Caulfield committee's kind of work more than land banks. You know, although some of us have some agricultural background, these are questions that, you know, haven't been fully analyzed yet. And I think that's the intention of our work over the next many months, is to look at some of these things in collaboration with the Conservation District. So I guess you'll have to wait for some complete answers on some of those. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, there are a number of things going on in Caulfield Farm, and one of them is our management plan process, where we're basically trying to set those parameters. You know, we are looking at the wetland areas and really wanting to make sure that there's not degradation of those areas or some of the forested areas as well. So we're setting up kind of, you know, parameters to operate within as the agricultural operation, and working with a conservation district where their concern is similar, just really trying to maintain the resource and limit any potential ecological damage or degradation of the resource, basically. That's our focus, and will be, as we move forward and pick a long-term lessee, that will be a key question.
Great. Kat asks, do you have a collective big dream or goal for the overall resiliency of the islands and the bioregion?
Wow. Yeah, you know, I think that lots of people are working on that, but and certainly the president has come out with his idea of conservation of 30% of the landscape, basically. It's a good goal, and certainly something to work toward. We're definitely looking at that across the archipelago, and have done a lot of work to try and figure out what key priorities are and to try and protect them as best we can. Our reality is, you know, we can't buy everything, that's for sure, which is often why we try as hard as possible to work with partners and find additional resources to bring to the table. But yeah, trying to conserve those larger conservation areas is one of the key things we're focused on.
Okay.
Tanya,
Yes, sir.
I would like to turn that question around, and not to preempt anybody who still has a question, but I'd like to ask our community members here, well, two questions actually. For Orcas, what's your favorite preserve and why? But second, what would you like to see us do in the future in terms of priorities? What kind of land would you like to see us acquire? And if you have any even particular parcels, pieces of land, let us know. So I'd invite people to respond to that in the Q&A or to shoot Tanya an email, because that's what we'd like to know. Thanks.
let's see. Well, if they come up, I will read them, but anyone can also email me post presentation as well, or post meeting with those if there's anything specific. Let's see, we have a new person. Kim asks, the idea on the property tax bill, we can ask about interest in easement and donations. I think that means when the property bill goes out to the public, Kim, maybe ask the county to include that question. Probably did. I'm sorry if I didn't read that correctly. I think that's a comment. If you want to retype or add to that. And I think you have to talk to the auditor's office. It's a good suggestion. Let's see. Is the goal of the land bank, and we have 4 minutes, just to keep everybody on time. Is the goal of the land bank to support the lessee in making a profit or in preserving the land at Caulfield Farm?
Our goal is to protect the resource, and we want the lessee to be successful, but our ultimate goal is not to ensure their profit. We need to come to a good arrangement with them that's workable, that enables them to actually continue their operation and hopefully for a long period of time. But our underlying goal is definitely protection of the resource, including the soil resource, to ensure that land remains productive and maybe increases in productivity over time.
I would say our goal is to make Caulfield both ecologically and agriculturally sustainable. And what that means is being economically sustainable. So that's definitely part of the goal.
Some people did respond to your request, Brian. Let's see, Kim says to preserve, I always say this wrong, Arbutus menziesii, and I apologize greatly if I just destroyed that. Let's see, Dylan, let's see, on ideal land, Jones property in Moran stands out as a hugely strategic acquisition for Orcas and Moran. And just generally reconsidering experimenting with more mountain bike trails and Turtleback, maybe cut a single dedicated single track around the preserve.
We like Madronas too.
Kim says, I think I got that right regarding the donation on the easement on tax bill. So that I'll look into who to talk to about that, because I like that plan. Deborah goes up Turtlehead almost daily via Turtleback. So she says, thank you. Let's see. And I think I've got one minute left. If there's anything, any the commissioners or staff, if there's any last parting, the rest of the, I believe I can keep these questions and go back through and either answer them via email or the follow-up afterwards.
Yeah, there's a couple questions laying out, but the answers are going to take longer than the time we have left.
Right, we can follow up with these. Is there any, I really want to thank everybody for their great questions and comments and engagement. Did the staff, my coworkers or commissioners have anything else you'd like to share?
I would just offer that, as the person on the ground around the island most of the time, I welcome folks to call me anytime. I'm always happy to hear from people, whether it's something good or not. So feel free to call me anytime. I look forward to talking with you.
I think that goes for Brian and I as well. And our contact information should be on the Land Bank's website if you don't already have it. But we, as being your local commissioners, very interested in hearing questions, concerns, and having you connect with us.
Yeah, I think we'd like to do a forum like this periodically, mostly to hear from you. When we first started talking about this, we never anticipated that it would be via Zoom. So I hope the next time we can do it in person. But don't wait for us to call you. You call us.
And then, so for those that are still on the call, there will be a follow-up email. I'll have my information, my email in there. So if you had a question that you didn't think of at the time, or we weren't fortunate to get to yours, please feel free to send it through that or beforehand if you already have my email, and we will get the questions answered one way or the other. And we do have our next commission meeting. The April meeting is it's a week from Friday, so April 16th, and that the agenda is usually posted by Monday, which has the Zoom link, and you can join. We start at 8:30, so hope to see you there as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks to everybody for being here. Really appreciate it.
I'm going to stop recording and then hit end.